Why is Walmart closing its Portland stores? Should we repeal Section 230? Is funding Ukraine more of an investment than a cost? We'll talk about all of these takes and more on today's episode of Good Take, Bad Take. Hey friends, welcome to this episode of Good Take, Bad Take. This is the podcast where we gather takes all across the internet. We highlight the good ones and what's great about them. We also highlight the bad ones and try to pick apart what they're saying that's wrong or the arguments that they make that are flawed. My name is Britt, and I'm here with my co-host Donnie. And before we get started, make sure to like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. You can find us on Instagram at Good Take, Bad Take Pod and on Twitter and YouTube at Good Bad Take Pod. Now, without further ado, let's get into the first of these takes. So the first one we've got, it's a tweet and a comment on an article. And the article is from comingsoon.net. And the headline reads, Pixar CCO says, Lightyear asks, quote, too much of the audience. And basically kind of goes into, hey, you know, we included some, alternative culture stuff in here. About the roles of men and women and how they relate to each other, and it just asked a little bit too much. It failed pretty bad. The film did. And then David Bowes, a Twitter user, tweets, "It's always a good idea to blame your audience for the film failing. Couldn't possibly be anything else." What do you think, Donnie? Did you watch Lightyear?
I didn't. I read the summary as much as I could, but I didn't want to go see it for a multitude of reasons. But this is a good take. He's obviously being sarcastic here. And I wanted to highlight that it's funny because there's a lot of depth here as to kind of the ridiculously of what the Pixar CCO is saying. I think first and foremost, saying we asked too much of the audience is a totally condescending way to say how you are so much more enlightened than the masses. Like, wow, like the rubes out there just weren't ready for the high-mindedness. We just asked too much of them. It's totally condescending and ridiculous is the first thing I think that Dave correctly points out. The other thing is the extent to which the plot revolved around the pro-LGBTQ agenda, which is a lot of the outrage that sparked around this, right? Is that it involved an LGBT character. I think she was, if I recall correctly, that sort of the gist of the plot involves time travel and stuff like that. And his old, Buzz Lightyear's old partner, she gets married while during the time lapse when he's away or something like that, and it's to another woman. And then they somehow have a daughter, and exactly, they have a daughter, which is somehow inexplicable. And then in the time travel that she takes over, so it's not even a major focal point of the film. So the first thing that I have to note is how the Pixar CCO acts as though they're doing something really bold and brave through this, and it's like they don't even have the bravery to make it a crucial part of the plot or anything like they're acting like they're doing this super noble, amazing, courageous thing, and they really aren't. But second, it's not asking too much. It's a matter of the fact that like the film also just sucked. Like, I am a Toy Story diehard, and people who are very socially progressive and not, talked about how much the film just dragged and was totally boring, regardless of their feelings on that. So there's just a lot of different elements here that totally make me roll my eyes, and sort of the sanctimonious quote from the CCO there.
Yeah. Did you watch Top Gun Maverick?
I still didn't. No,
you still have it? Okay.
I don't see movies that often. So
okay. Yeah, I think it's probably streaming somewhere.
Probably, yeah.
It was dope in theaters, but I don't know if it's really something to watch not in theaters. But I have talked about this before on the show, but at the beginning of Top Gun Maverick, Tom Cruise pops up on the screen. He's like, "Hey, like, we made this movie for you to like it, so we hope you really do like it." That's it. And it's like, wow, what a novel concept. And it ended up doing pretty good at the box office. I think it like $1 billion. And it was for a Top Gun movie, right? Which is like, oh, I'm watching this to see some dope plane flying, some like corny cliches that are kind of funny because they're there, and a lot of like just serving up what the audience wants to see. Like it did all that, and it was great. And I was like, oh, okay, I enjoy this. It's not, it's not a Quentin Tarantino movie or something like that where it's like, oh, there's all this nice stuff and it's so artsy and all these different things. And I know some people don't necessarily like him, but you know what I'm trying to say. It's not some avant-garde, film, but it did what it was supposed to do. And that's what when you're gonna pull out like legacy characters, like at least honor, the genre and
Absolutely.
honor the, what the audience expects from it. And I think that what's so sad about all of these like kind of established, IPs is that they've totally destroyed all the goodwill that they had, right? Like even though I didn't hear anything about like the political stuff in Lightyear until, after it released, I still wasn't planning to go see it because I just hated what they did with Toy Story 4,
Amen.
and
Yep.
it was just it was totally destroyed all the characters, went back on all of their character development. I mean, and that's after they butchered all the, legacy characters in Star Wars, and you know all these amazing franchises that have been built up that everyone's come to enjoy. For some reason they feel like they have to go back and like make their own version of it, and rewrite characters as opposed to just creating new stories, which is like what that's for. So yeah, that's the reason no one went to watch it. I mean, I don't even know how much of like publicity they gave that like the LGBT thing in it. I didn't really, like I said, I didn't really even know about it until after the film was released, but I still wasn't planning on seeing it because they've done it in so many other films and destroyed so many characters and done such a disservice to the stories that it's just like, well, I don't want to spend $15 or whatever it is in a 2 hours of a weeknight or something like that to go see this. It's just not going to be worth it. And so that's the real reason people aren't going to go see these films, is because they're not good, is what
Yeah.
it is.
Well, and to that point, it feels like they use the fact that they incorporated some socially progressive element in the film as their justification for why
Yeah.
it did poorly. Oh, it's and frankly, I tend to think that the sort of moral outrage from people who don't want this kind of agenda shoved down their throat on every waking moment, which it seems like it is, because it's always like teased in as some irrelevant thing, like, oh, we're gonna have to make this part of it. Um, that is probably a much smaller minority than the outrage that was online would exclaim. Because if the movie was really good and it still included all that, I think a
Yeah.
lot of people would have gone and seen
Eh,
it and been successful.
Did you saw
And
Everything Everywhere All at Once, right?
no, I still haven't. I
Oh my
know
gosh,
it's on
dude.
my
Oh my
it's on my
gosh.
to watch list. I
Okay,
promise.
well,
I promise.
it's a fantastic film, and
Yeah,
there's an element of that in it, but I didn't even care because I
right.
was like, well, it's still like the characters were served really well and the story was great.
Yeah, and so, I think there was another example of Pixar specifically doing this. From what I recall, was I wish, or maybe it was just Disney. I don't remember. It was an animated film, and I can't recall what its name is. It's newer than Lightyear, and I was talking about it. And
Oh,
one of the characters in it is is gay, I think, and all my friends who watched it were like, this character had no personality except for the fact that he was gay. Like, that's all he was there for and all he was written to. And that's just a really good descriptor of so many of these movies where they think they can rely on sort of these cheap gimmicks and then not write well and not write with depth or meaning, in a way that is honoring to the characters, in a way that is interesting, and all these sorts of things. And then they're like, oh well, it just failed because people are bigots or
yeah.
whatever.
And that's
Um,
that. Oh, sorry, continue.
Oh yeah, yeah, no, no, no. I was just gonna say, and I think that that's true of Star Wars Episode 8 with Ryan Johnson, where the whole idea is this idea of subversion,
Yeah.
and I think it was true of Toy Story 4,
Yeah.
where literally the characters are cardboard cutouts of themselves and betray everything of their character fiber from the first three films. And then, of course, this film is not technically in that same universe. It's the movie that inspired the toy, in that, which is just kind of a kind of fun but kind of confusing way to do it. But all
Yeah.
it ends up doing is just making really, really silly um, departures from the characters that you come to associate and know. And I don't know if you care about the ending or the plot, but what they do with the Emperor Zurg, who is this, in the toy universe, they sort of reveal as a joke to Star Wars, he's Buzz's father, and they retcon that
Yeah.
in just the most pathetic way that also undermines characters and development. And it so all of that being said, yeah, that this culture of like, we're gonna blame failure on everything else and everyone else, not ourselves, is very cringe.
Well, and what sucks is like this guy, this CCO saying this, means that they have not integrated the market signals properly into the
Right.
way they like choose to do business. Because I like at the school you and I went to, like we had a program for minority students that would get pretty significant scholarships. I think full ride scholarships, and it
Yeah.
was required that they keep a 3.0, right? Which I think is like a B or B plus or something like that average. And we had one student. He'd actually grown up in like a white family. Like he was half white, half mixed. But pretty upper class, like more upper class growing up than I was. Growing up. And I remember he still got a full ride scholarship to go, but he slacked so much on all of his stuff that he was getting like C's and D's and stuff. And so he lost his scholarship and then eventually had to not go to that school anymore because one, he didn't want to pay for it. And he felt slighted by the losing his full ride scholarship. But it's like, and he's like, well, the cause of all this is racism, right? Like it's systemically racist here at this school. And it's like, man, the more you say that about yourself and the more you integrate that signal into the way, you interpret how things have happened to you, the less likely you are to actually like improve upon in the future and avoid that situation. Because the reason you are not going to the school anymore and the reason you lost your scholarship is because you did a bad job. You didn't write the papers, you didn't do the work, you didn't meet the criteria. And the same thing applies to these film companies. It's like, okay, I know it's a nice feeling to be like, oh, well, we took a virtuous stand. And the reason the movie didn't do good is because of racism and online trolls and, white men who just freaking hate, anything that we create. It's like, no, that's not true, man. The more you say that, the more likely you're going to repeat the mistake and keep losing money. And, the film studios that learn this and figure it out, and it's like, oh, maybe we should just make good movies. We don't need to preach to the choir, about things. They're going to be really successful and there's going to be awesome stories told. But right now, it seems like all the big studios that control all the IP of our childhoods don't understand that, which is
Yeah.
sad.
Yep. I totally agree.
All right, moving on to our next one. So we've got an article from the New York Post and then a retweet of it. So the New York Post has an article that says, Walmart to close remaining Portland stores as city faces shoplifting crisis. The headline at fortune.com also reads, Walmart is shutting down its last 2 stores in Portland. Sales have not met expectations. And this person tweets out that link saying, maybe you should leave the business reporting to real business outlets like Fortune. I've kind of read it out of order. They're closing 10 stores across the country because they have poor sales. What do you think, Donnie? Is Walmart closing in Portland because it's just got bad sales?
This is such, oh my gosh, this is such a bad take. I read the article that he linked, right? Because, but before going into that, let's just analyze this without even reading this article, okay? Because maybe the article explains that I'm wrong. But when I first read this, I see first the headline that New York Post says is Walmart to close remaining Portland stores as city faces shoplifting crisis. So, technically nothing untrue there, even if the closing had nothing to do with shoplifting, because there is a shoplifting crisis in Portland. That is the fact. And so they're saying, hey, as this shoplifting crisis is happening, Portland is going to lose out their Walmarts. But the thing that cracks me up is this guy's talking as if shoplifting and sales figures have nothing to do with each other, as if shoplifting is just something that happens, doesn't affect the stores, doesn't affect one, their costs for security, 2, their costs for the product, 3, costs for potential liability if they have any sort of altercation between security guards and shoplifters, and 4, so as if none of those factors impact that decision. But then I read the article. And I didn't want to put all of this in the take for post, but I'm just gonna read some things here. So the interesting thing here is, while some outlets have speculated that shoplifting losses were a factor in the decision, Walmart has pushed back against that, saying in a statement with an NBC affiliate, we consider many factors, including current and projected financial performance, location, population, customer needs, and the proximity of other nearby stores when making these difficult decisions. After we decide to move forward, our focus is on our associates and their transition, which is the case here. Okay, so the whole pushback, this is characterized as pushback in Fortune, is the most bland, generic corporate statement that's a non-statement. That, like, do you think that Walmart is seriously going to say, yeah, it was the crime? No, of course they're not going to say that. That's not a good business. Like any sort of PR expert would tell you that would not be a good statement to make. So of course they're going to say that. And what do you think what do you think is a factor that would have to do with financial performance, location, population, and customer needs? Obviously, crime theft. The article then goes in and talks about how Portland police have been cracking down on shoplifters in recent months, as if this is an indicator that, well, no, they've been cracking down in the past since December. But it's like, Walmart's looking at the big picture. They're looking at long-term projections and costs and things. So if you've had like 5 years of shoplifting crisis, and then in the last 3 months they've cracked down, what do you think you're going to go on? Of course you're going to go on the historic data where the cost is. The other thing that's really funny, and I'll promise I'll shut up after this, is they talk about how there are some outside city limits, Portland suburbs, where there are more than a dozen Walmart locations. So you're talking about a city where there's a dense population, okay? And then you're talking about they still have presence in the surrounding area, just in the suburbs. I wonder what the difference between a Portland suburb Walmart location and a Portland city proper location would be, where these many factors might impact whether or not they choose to open or close. It couldn't possibly be crime stats. That couldn't possibly be the difference between an inner city Walmart and a suburban Portland Walmart. Definitely not. What it's just a complete silly leap to make, and this guy's acting like he's got this trump card. And from my reading, this Fortune article confirms that it's likely that crime was in fact the cause.
Yeah, what's hilarious about it is people will talk about like theft or property damage, like, well, they've got insurance or whatever it is, and it's like, okay, yeah, you've got insurance to maybe cover the physical good, but if anyone has ever, I'm thankful that I've never been in this position, but I've known people that have lost their house in a fire, or they had, I had a coworker who had, basically they had a leak in their kitchen while they were away on vacation. It destroyed everything. Everything got rotted and wet, and they had like a year and a half, basically demo and remodel, just because of various things that happened. It's like, yeah, the insurance company paid for, all the repairs and stuff, but it's kind of hard to quantify, and therefore they don't pay out on the inconveniences that occur with that, right? So there's all these other ancillary costs that come with theft, like restocking shelves or putting in mitigation things, or distraction of staff and stuff like that. But that's after, right? If you just Google, you can find it. Walmart says that they lose across all their stores nationally $3 billion to theft every year, right? And at a company that functions, I think they're like 3 or 400 in revenue each year, and I think their profit margin or ratio is like 1 or 2%. $3 billion is about what they make in profit, right? At least in a quarter or something like that. So, eliminating that actually will boost their profit ratios if they eliminate the stores that have the highest amount of theft. And like you were saying, the fact that they're not eliminating stores they're not eliminating stores that lay in less densely populated areas, but also have less crime in them, is a telltale sign that, oh, what is the differentiating factor here, right? Of all the reasons that Walmart represented listed, sales figures, location, all these different things. It's like, well, by every single metric, the stores that are in the more densely populated, more highly affluent areas should be doing better revenue wise than the ones that are outside of it. What's the other factor that could be associated with that? Well, it's the crime. It's having to address it. It's the liability, right? There's huge liability if you're trying to prevent people from stealing stuff. You have an employee get into an altercation with someone that is shoplifting, and you get sued. So it's like, yeah, that's not a risk we're willing to have. And if we can't be in a place where we have an acceptable amount of risk, we're going to shut that stuff down. That's how any business functions. That's how we all as individuals function, right? We weigh the cost benefit analysis. If the risk is greater than the reward, we end up not doing that activity, or not opening that business.
Yeah, it's this complete divorcing of the different factors having to do with each other in this, right? Like, as if, no, it's only to do with low sales, which, by the way, this article does not say. The Walmart spokesman doesn't say it's just low sales. They say it's the number of factors, and then they give that non-answer. So the person who posts this tweet not only is completely ignoring the fact that a crime spike would have to do with low sales as well as revenue numbers in total for all the cost reasons that we've listed. But they also are making the exact same error they're accusing the New York Post of making, which is isolating one thing in the list of this corporate non-statement and then saying that's the sole reason. This person's saying they're closing 10 stores across the country because they have poor sales. But again, that's not what Walmart said. Walmart said it was a number of factors having to do with sales, population, financial performance, customer needs, proximity, etc. So this person is doing the exact same thing that they're accusing, except worse, because they're only isolating one, whereas we're saying that crime was a contributing factor to this, and probably the key contributing factor. The other aspect I want to say before we move on is that generally speaking, I'm not particularly snobby to Walmart. I buy stuff at Walmart and have no issue with it. But the core demographic for Walmart, generally speaking, will be lower income individuals because they are able to offer things at a cheaper price, lower cost to access, and have better prices than some of that everyday goods, as well as some upper end things that might be a little bit lower quality but more accessible and affordable to people, which is awesome. But roughly speaking, that kind of market is going to be much more accessible in a city type environment than a suburban one. That's not to say I have the stats offhand. I don't know. I haven't run an analysis of the average net worth in the rough location of where these two Walmarts were in Portland proper and Portland suburbs, but generally speaking, suburban areas are a little bit more well-to-do because you have a lower concentration of apartment complexes, higher concentration of homes where you have to be a homeowner to own it. So the median income is probably a little bit higher in terms of the demographic that's going to be in the vicinity of the Walmart versus the one in the vicinity of the Walmart in the city proper. So not only is the liability of the crimes and the other things like that so off-putting that a more foot trafficked area is closing down, which is a pretty big deal, but it's also a higher concentration of its probably key demographic. So the demographic difference is also pretty big, and just emphasizes the fact that there has to be something pretty extraordinary for them to choose the suburban ones over the city ones.
I want to say that there's some franchise that decided they were going to close everything in San Francisco. Was it Walgreens? Might have
Very
been.
well could be. I
One,
mean, I was gonna say California has those whack laws about theft not being charged over a
yeah,
certain price and
exactly.
stuff.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think it's like any theft that is under $1,000 is like a catch and release kind of deal.
Yeah.
So thieves would go in knowing, calculating like, okay, if I get load up this amount of stuff and this amount of volume of baskets, then like it's going to be under 1,000. If they catch me, there is absolutely no risk. And so you'd see these videos of guys going in there with garbage bags and just shoveling stuff in, and
Literally running down halls with their arm out, just
yep.
letting them pour
Just
in.
absolutely crazy. And so it's like I can't remember if it's Walgreens or some other one of those like drugstore places, but they basically had to shut down and they all vacated San Francisco because it's like, well, how can we operate here if like we can be put to death through, death by a bunch of that under $1,000 thefts, right? Because that's like, yeah, sure, Walgreens is $1 billion company or whatever, but like that adds up pretty fast, right? If and especially if everyone kind of has free and clear ability to go in and do that. So businesses, in order to offer affordable products to you, they operate at the margins, and if they operate at the margins, that means there's very little margin for error. Very much like Walmart, it's 1 to 2% profit margin each year. So if you got theft that equals about 1% of its revenue each year, that's the difference between life or death in a lot of ways for them, or at least profit or no profit in the year on taking a loss. So you got to do something to address it, and the best way to address it is to dilute the amount of stores that there actually are, or limit, not dilute, limit the amount of stores there are in existence.
Yeah. If you put this in any other terms, the people who claim it's not a problem would easily see. I mean, like look at like a massive boat and then say, oh, there's just like a couple of leaks in the bottom here.
Yeah.
Like, of course that's going to build up over time and sink it if you don't fix it or fill them in the holes or eliminate the problem there. Like that,
Yep.
it's just kind of like this is really basic, and the fact that people miss this shows the level of the level people are willing to play mental gymnastics with themselves to justify their ideological causes.
All right, moving on to our next one. We've got a Twitter user who tweets out, funny that the same people who are happy that Elon got Twitter and he is reinstating questionable folks are the ones who want to throw away Section 230, which really looks like a cell phone because the day it happens, guess whose profiles will be blocked immediately? Example, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I think this is a good take from someone who I probably don't agree with on a lot of things, but I think that this is the correct take. So Section 230 is a very complicated legal, encoding, but it's the broad sweeping definition, if you're not familiar, is it's this part of a specific regulation that protects common carriers online from the content that the user posts. So for instance, if I go onto Facebook and I say, I am a raging racist and I am going to, burn all white people alive because I'm racist against white people. Facebook is not liable for me saying that just because I posted it on Facebook. And this kind of protection is for a lot of different online carriers. And this Section 230, which gives this protection, has been attacked both on the right and the left. Yep. And it's oftentimes from populists on the right. And it's funny because someone put it this way, I thought was very good. People on the right who want to reform or remove Section 230 generally want more content to not be taken down. They want more content to stay online. People on the left who want to take down Section 230 want more content taken down and want more people these carriers to be more liable. And so you have to think, wait, two of these competing notions are going for the same goal. Which one is more likely? And I think when you look at the facts of the matter, it's so much more likely that the removal of Section 230 does not promote free speech, but in fact silences it. Because if I, as a business, which Facebook is, or Zoom, or any kind of online platform, am now responsible for the random things that people say, and I'm a big platform, so I've got millions of users, what on earth do you think I am more likely to do? Promotes more people speaking on it, or crack down on anyone who could potentially cause me a lawsuit and a problem? I think it's very much the latter in this case.
Yeah, I definitely think it's a good take. I think it was somewhere in the 90s is when Section 230 came out. And the intent of it was that it was going to protect speech, right, on the internet, that you would differentiate between, I believe it was platform and publisher, right? So like the New York Times or someone is a publisher. They selectively edit and choose what type of messaging, what type of people have the ability to, put stuff on their news website and in their articles and stuff like that. And because they have that selective editing ability, then they are liable because it's basically their voice, right? That's putting that stuff out. Whereas if you're a platform like Facebook or Twitter, it's like, hey, I'm providing a place for people to say things out there. Maybe the individual that puts their content out there might be liable in some way, right? Or they might be able to use what they've set out there for libel or other stuff like that. But the actual person that is platforming that speech, Twitter, Facebook, is not the one that is responsible. And that was really good, right? That was basically more so less honored for the last however long, 20, 30 years, whenever it got enacted. And then 2016, Donald Trump won the election. And rather than kind of talking about like signals and making sure you're getting to the root cause of why something happened, and in the previous posts with the media, the Democrats, rather than being like, man, we ran one of the worst candidates in the world, and we've also just done such a poor job, and the American everyday man has gotten sick of our elitism. Instead of looking at their mirror and being like, oh man, maybe we should change that, they said, oh no, it's because a couple Russian accounts bought several $100,000 worth of ad space, and they swayed the election, and Donald Trump had the ability to get his message out to all these people and with disinformation and all this stuff. And so then they started dragging these CEOs and various executives into, before Congress and interrogating them, essentially threatening them, saying like, look, you better, moderate your content. So in a lot of ways, not honoring the spirit of Section 230. And so these Republicans, I think the Daily Wire a lot of times will be like, oh yeah, we should repeal Section 230. And it's like, man, that's only because you just hate the big tech companies so much, or you think you do, for what they've done to you guys, censoring and all this stuff. But the reason those guys have censored is because no one is actually like living out the spirit of Section 230, which if we did, then nothing would be censored. And social media platforms' incentives are to have as many people on their platform using it as possible so they can advertise them and make revenue. If you take that incentive away, or you put a more strong disincentive, like we might fine you or break you up, as Elizabeth Warren has threatened, then maybe that's enough for them to, deprioritize getting eyeballs in because they have to address another bigger threat. So yeah, it's I agree with this take. It the Republicans who want to repeal it want to take vengeance on the tech companies, but in reality, they're just shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, I want to you know take, especially the conservatives who want to take Section 230 down. That's the kind of the more interesting place to go,
Yeah.
because there really are people who vehemently believe that this will promote more speech. And I want to take them and ask them sort of two hypotheticals. The first being, let's talk about Mark Zuckerberg. Let's assume Mark is moderate lefty who does not like what Donald Trump says. Let's say he doesn't like what Tucker Carlson says and really wants there to be no questioning of the support for the war in Ukraine or something like that. Do you think that the removal of Section 230, where now he's liable to be sued, do you think that the courts are more likely to support him uh, leaving? Are they more likely to support him or you if you sue him for taking down that kind of speech? Do you think that the government institutions of the bureaucratic courts are going to say, you know what, Mark Zuckerberg has silenced this person for national security reasons, and therefore he's justified in doing so, and the takedown was fine? Do you think that's more likely, or do you think they're more likely to be like, nope, we believe in free speech, and we're going to let all the voices in? I think it's very clear that the removal of Section 230 opens up lawsuits and liabilities, and what you will have instead is you will have people who are reasonable, who want to manage a space, leaving the market, or you will have them cracking down on their own policy guidelines so that they change the very nature of the company they are to not be considered a common carrier, or a publisher, or whatever they need to do to get out of the liability of having these people. So you end up breaking up that entire platform that was used to disseminate information at all. And they might argue that's a good thing, but then you have no one in the space. Because I would then say, so you've gotten rid of a bunch of mechanisms of speech by removing someone who's center left of Facebook. What about Elon and Twitter? Okay, in Section 230 gets removed. What do you think Elon wants to do? Well, sure, he right now he's restoring a lot of previously banned accounts. He's restoring a lot of these accounts that were controversial, saying things. Well, then you remove Section 230, and guess what? Now you've added so much liability to him that if he wants to keep running Twitter, he's going to have to ban those accounts, because he's not going to be able to deal with the flurry of lawsuits that come in based on all that. And guess what? What's more likely? Again, he could either A, ban all these people, or B, he could even altogether leave Twitter. He could sell it again, because frankly, he got into it and it's been nothing but a headache for him already. And then all you have are the lefties in charge who, like I just said, are more likely to want to ban, to change the nature of the platform so that it's not under this new categorization that you've made, as well as break up the platform altogether. And then you literally just have people relying on corporate media functions again. You have people now with the invention of things like ChatGPT going to AI models, which are also controlled by people who have left of center ideas and very progressive values. So, everywhere you turn, when you remove Section 230, all you end up doing is either creating more incentives to ban people, or creating more incentives to turn to other less reliable sources that aren't going to be allowing voices that are not culturally popular.
Yeah, I don't have any more to add to that. It was a good summary.
Okay.
Let's move to the
When
next
you,
one.
yeah,
We've got a Ron Paul quote, and it's a meme, and it says Ron Paul and racism, has a picture of Dr. Paul, and it reads, "Racism is simply an ugly form of collectivism, the mindset that views humans strictly as members of groups rather than individuals. Racists believe that all individuals who share superficial physical characteristics are alike. As collectivists, racists think only in terms of groups. By encouraging Americans to adopt a group mentality, the advocates of so called, quote, diversity actually perpetuate racism. This obsession with racial group identity is inherently racist. The true antidote to racism is liberty." What do you think? Good or bad take from Dr.
wonderful
Paul?
take. This is a great take. Uh, the idea that racism is this inherent state of being, this original sin that you have, is it is a complete collectivist mindset. Whether or not you view collectivism as a good or a bad thing, I think it's pretty hard to deny that at its core, racism is collectivism. And even talking in intersectional terms is collectivism. If you take them sort of in their words, the sort of the idea of, it's not is there racism, it's where is the racism in this moment and in this conversation with this person, whatever. And there is this collectivist guilt that all white people have in adopting any worldview where they are naturally going to be racist. That is collectivism. You are collectively saying that all of these causes are, or all of these people think in this way that is racist. And then, of course, when you talk about systemic racism, um, you're also talking about how, in the most case, I should say, the way that systemic racism gets talked about in many cases is the only reason why all these people would, or this individual person could have had a bad experience, is due to his race. And in that way, you're being a collectivist or a racist yourself, saying that the only reason why this person would fail is because of the color of their skin and all that sort of stuff. But when you get down to what actual racism really is, it is that collective thinking, that the people who want to promote DEI stuff, the way that they think, that is a form of racism. Because when you are racist, when you talk about the inferiority of a certain group of people, whether it's Black Americans or Black people in general, or Jews, or Asians, or whatever, you are merely reducing a person down to a set of biological traits that are shared with other groupings of people in that area. All it is collectivism at its core. You've dehumanized the person into a group identity, and the more you collectivize something, the less you see the individual for its unique inherent value. And I think that's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, I agree with you, and obviously very much agree with Dr. Paul on all this stuff. And I can't remember the name of it, but there was a Chrome extension that basically, if you were reading an article online from some woke publication, it would change. If it was talking about like the white vote or whatever, it would change that to like a racially charged term, like the black vote or the Jewish vote or whatever it was. And I think it was a pretty good litmus test to kind of decide, whether or not an article or a publication is actually racist, right? Because racism is not, and like it's kind of this weird blend. The modern day thing we've got going on right now with the woke crowd is it's a blend of Marxism and this racism stuff, and it's like okay, well, it's racism is, and they'll even say this, it's what's prejudice plus power, right? So if you don't have power, then you can't actually be racist. And then there, because black people don't have power, which seems really racist to say, because I think about like the record for the most Grammys won is by a black woman, and things like that. Like, I'm not saying that's the only metric to measure power by, but like there are a lot of things out there that indicate that like black people do have power. And I'm not saying that like they have all the power in the world, but you're saying that they don't, which to me seems really awful to say about a group of people that based on their skin color and everything like that. So yeah, they view it as a dynamic of prejudice plus power. And if you don't have power, then you kind of have whatever ability you want to say whatever you want about any other group, and that's what they do. Whereas you and I view racism as Dr. Paul views it, right? It's collectivism, and it's judging and making assumptions about a group, based on some physical characteristic. And not only is it evil, right? It doesn't adhere to the natural law, it doesn't adhere to our Christian moral ethics, but it's also just stupid, right? It's like the least now, I wouldn't say it's the least, necessarily, because there might be some like cultural things that you can associate, but it's like one of the less indicators, to what your experience is going to be with another person, and that's why it's stupid. It doesn't work in practice. Even if you do away with all the moral and ethical considerations of it, it's just a dumb way to live. And anyone that knows anything about anything and wants to succeed in life is not going to practice that in their daily life because it's not going to get them anywhere. And so and we're seeing this right with, like you were talking about, with the DEI stuff with different companies. It leads to, when you base it purely off of a physical characteristic rather than other metrics that are better leading indicators, like a test score or maybe an association or maybe projects they've worked on or other things like that. You end up diluting the talent pool, and you're not doing what is right for the business. I had a business partner, and I had two business partners. One of them was very much wanted to do DEI stuff, and then the other was, still kind of leaned that way, but also like had his head on straight. I was like, well, we need to do good as a company, and we're a company of 6 people right now, and so anyone we add, is basically adding another 16% to the company, right, in terms of personnel, and so they need to be awesome and they need to pull their weight. He's like, look, I don't care about whether or not they are this or that or identify this way or that way. We're a professional sports team and we're going to hire based up purely on ability. And I really like that because, like, if you look at like the NBA or you look at hockey, just by pure distribution, if it's purely by race, like, it seems pretty monolithic and it would be very collectivist, right? But that's not how they judge who gets in there, right? They're judging based on like actual ability. And yes, there is some truth to, like, hey, certain demographics are more physically inclined or grew up in a culture that had that stuff. But they're not making their decisions based on it. They're making their decisions based on skill. And that's why teams, do so well and they play at they're able to concentrate so much talent in such a, small, 12 people or whatever, and make it awesome. So yeah, racism's stupid. It's also immoral and unethical. And it is not prejudice plus power. It's just purely prejudice, and it's a stupid way to live.
Yeah, I love that because the way that you're describing that too, it really highlights how the racist thinking is inductive in nature. It's inductive reasoning, which would be a terrible way to operate in most of your day-to-day life, right? So rather than saying, rather than actually identifying if the individual is good, like, you know, people who got an A in calculus are good at math. John got an A in calculus, therefore he's good at math. The racist inductive collectivist, the collectivist mindset is inductive, which would be, John is Asian, Asians are good at math, therefore John is, or because Asians are good at math, John is good at math because he's Asian or whatever. And you have to make that collectivist assumption in the first place, where every sort of thing, because John is Asian, he's going to be good at math, whether or not you know if he's done anything before he's proved himself. That would be a terrible way to hire for a sports team. It would be a terrible way to hire for a company. It's a terrible way to live. It's the way that racists do operate. And it's the way that we need to be reevaluating all sort of collective behaviors and collectivist mindsets. When you start taking away people's individual opportunities and you start saying, we need to get everyone to move to this or that, realize that you're committing the same sin of racism just by a different metric, right? When you say that, everyone needs to, I don't know, move away from cars. Well, you've now started to take the needs of individuals and reduce them into, from being people with individual unique needs, into this group of, oh, they're just consumers who are, adding carbon to the planet or whatever it is. So you may not be reducing people based on their skin tone, but you're reducing them to their, carbon output or something like that, ignoring the fact that, this family wouldn't be able to make it to their son's sports game and pick up their kid from daycare without a personal vehicle to be able to do that. There's no bus route that would catch both of those at the same time. So, there's just so many forms of collectivism, and racism really is one. And even if you operate on their assumption of this ridiculous assumption of prejudice plus power, it's still collectivist, right? even if that is the only, you have to filter it through that stupid filter, which we don't agree, but if you did, you're still in a collectivist thinking mindset, because you're still dividing people based on who has privilege and power and who doesn't, who has, who's in charge, who's not, who has opportunity, who doesn't. It's all collectivism, even no matter how you cut it. And I think that collectivism is just a very silly way to operate and to
Yeah,
make your judgments in your day-to-day life.
that's good. All right, moving on to our last one. We've got two Twitter users, and I think we should judge these takes collectively
Okay.
to pull from from the last one, because they have the same idea, right? So the first tweet reads, "Upset about the cost of US aid to Ukraine? Analyze it like an investment. Would you spend $100 billion to save trillions? That's the goal. If Russia collapses, then the USA won't need to protect Europe anymore, and we may be able to cut a lot of defense spending in the future." And then someone follows up, "It's performative outrage. It's not cost, since it's just a tiny chunk of defense budget, which exists for this exact purpose. They're just signaling how anti establishment they are by saying no to whatever is proposed. For any excuse they come up with, disagreeableness is the point." What do you think? Is our funding to Ukraine, an investment, and furthermore, is an investment that we've already allocated funds for, so therefore it's just what we're supposed to spend money on?
Okay, I am going to highlight the one thing between these two tweets that I could possibly charitably agree with an asterisk in some situations. Okay,
Okay.
that's covered my bases enough here. It's performative outrage. They're signaling how anti-establishment they are by saying no, no, whatever's proposed they can come up with. There is a good deal of Republicans right now who are doing this as
Yeah,
performative outrage. They are only doing this because the Trump base has become anti-war because Trump made it fashionable. They still will advocate for more defense spending and more defense funds, and they're only doing it because it is popular. That is
that's
true.
fair.
However, this individual's username indicates libertarian or in somewhere in the liberty world. So when it comes to libertarian outrage and denying, there should be no confusion there, because we want to cut the defense spending. So the fact that it's a small chunk of defense, who cares? We want to cut it all. That's like saying, oh well, it's only moral outrage that you want to end the war in Yemen. We bomb lots of countries overseas. Yeah, we want to end them all. Just because you're picking one thing that you don't want happening doesn't mean you can't also be opposed to the others. This is a total it's like the total meme where it's like, oh, you're saying well, it's to me it's kind of like the ridiculousness of the people who retorted back all lives matter. It's like, look, I don't like the movement Black Lives Matter and the Marxist leanings, but just the idea of specifying the fact that Black Lives Matter doesn't mean you're not opposed to all lives mattering either. You can be both. I think that was always a silly objection, and that's what I kind of see here too.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing is, I love how in the first tweet, it's almost like this defeatist mentality is already seeped in, where he says, if Russia collapses, then the US won't need to protect Europe anymore, and we may be able to cut a lot of defense spending. You know that's not going to happen. What do we might even be able to do that. That would be the point. We shouldn't be spending this money, you doofus. That we may be able to. Oh my gosh. Of course we're not going to. Oh, what a ridiculous suggestion.
The first tweet, it's like, "Just view it as an investment. Would you spend $100 billion to save trillions?" It reminded me of this story that one of my buddies who lived in West Seattle told me. One of his neighbors, a really, really rich executive at some technology company, had a $2 million car, right? So he paid $2 million, bought this car. Nuts. That's crazy in of itself. He's like, yeah, that's crazy. But what's even more crazy is that it costs $100,000 per year to maintain that car, because it's such a unique thing to get the oil changed, to do routine maintenance or anything. You had to have a specialized person, a specialized garage with special tools, and it's $100,000. He's like, yeah, the guy just couldn't afford it. Like, you could afford a $2 million car, but having an extra $100,000, which is more than basically everyone's mortgage payment per year if you own a house, is just not tenable, even for someone like that. And so, but that makes tons of sense, right? So he sold it, need to get rid of that ongoing cost. It's like, okay, What if that guy said, he's like, no, 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 no. It's $100,000 a year. It's an investment for me to not lose a $2 million car. It's like,
Yeah.
no, that's not an investment. That's a cost, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a cost that you got every year. And it's like, it's if you're, you bought something you probably shouldn't have bought in the first place because you can't actually own it because the cost of owning it is too high. Yeah, you could afford the initial payment, but the ownership and the ongoing maintenance is too much. So actually, you can't afford it. We cannot afford to be the defender of Europe, right? Like if we're spending trillions, the problem is not. He's right in that the problem is not the $100 billion; it's the trillions we're spending in there. But it's like no, the $100 billion that we're giving this time around. I think we're at like almost 300 billion now in total aid to Ukraine. That's just perpetuate. We're just adding to the pile, right? It's not like we're actually going to get anything out of it. We're not actually going to be. If someone told me, "Hey, you could give $100 billion, and I guarantee you that we will stop defending Europe," at the end of it, that'd be great. But it's like you can't really stop defending Europe if you're perpetuating what causes Europe to be in danger in the first place, which has always been expanding the borders of NATO right up to the doorstep of Russia, as much as they'd like to claim the opposite, and then also positioning weapons, right at Russia's border, aimed right at them. And yeah, we say they're defensive, but they're definitely not. And so, what are we doing right now when we give aid to the Ukraine? We're putting weapons right on Russia's doorstep. We're pointing right at them. We're explicitly saying, "Oh yeah, this is for us to cause Russia to collapse." Like, imagine if they did that to us, right? Imagine if they went into Ontario or they went into Mexico City and they started positioning Tomahawk missiles there, and they started, throwing a coup to install a pro-Russian, president in Mexico City, and then they were also sending tanks and stuff to fight in there when we were trying to, repel, whatever type, trying to reclaim Texas, from them after they took it from us. It's like, yeah, it would be probably perceived as a lot of aggression, and Mexico and South America would probably not be very safe from the United States because we'd be like, hey, this is just too close to us. We have to go in and take it out. So I'm not saying that I like what Russia's doing. I'm also not saying that I don't support Ukrainians defending, their own personal property and things like that. But what I am saying is that like what we do, the $100 billion we give, does not help them in any way. It actually makes it worse. It does the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. It's a cost, and it also inflames things in such a way that we're going to have to continue giving cost to it. It's that age-old joke that, well, I'm losing money if I don't buy this,
Yeah.
this thing.
It's so funny because you can judge the merit of an argument almost, or maybe not even the merit, because I'm not saying that if an argument was misused in the past it's necessarily wrong today, but you can see how at least an argument is not airtight if you can convert the year to the 2000s and then just change in Iraq, right? So it's like upset about the cost of US involvement in Iraq, analyze it like an investment. Would you spend 100 billion to save trillions? That's the goal. If if the Al Qaeda collapses, then the US won't need to protect the Middle East anymore, and we may be able to cut a lot. It's just performative outrage. It's just a tiny chunk. They just want to be anti-establishment and they just want to be anti-America in this. Like, it's so transparent. Those were the things that were being said at the past. And then, of course, once we got involved, we can't just withdraw. So what do you think? Let's suppose for a moment that Russia collapses, and let's say there becomes like a big power vacuum. Do you think the US is going to stop sending money to Ukraine?
Oh, yeah.
They're just fighting for their own protection now. We can't just withdraw our support from them now. And man, you're so anti-America, you're so anti-democracy to support that. You're just trying to be a contrarian. No. This, again, I'm not saying that the comparison here makes it that it's necessarily untrue in this case, but it should highlight how this exact kind of guilt trip and this exact kind of reasoning's been used in the past, and it doesn't hold up. You actually have to argue on more merits than just this, because these are all very vapid, floppy excuses that kind of blow away with the wind.
It's funny that you bring up like Afghanistan and Iraq and everything, and because I remember it must have been around 2009 or 10 or whatever, right when Obama was going to do like the surge. Maybe it must have been later actually, but I heard people say like, oh yeah, you're right, like we shouldn't have been in there, we shouldn't have gone in there, but now that we're in there, we got to fix it now, we can't just leave. It's like, oh my gosh, like I see, like, you are willing to argue and be on every side of this argument in order for you to spend the money that you want to spend and to fund the military industrial complex people that you want to fund. It's so funny how we withdraw from Afghanistan, and then suddenly, I think it's like at the end of it, we're funding like 60 billion or 80 billion dollars a year. And then right away, we're funding the same companies that were supplying military equipment in Afghanistan. We're funding them to provide things to Ukraine, and we're doing it, almost tenfold what we were doing in Afghanistan in terms of a yearly budget. So it's just, at some point you've got to be like, man, like, you're speaking out of both sides of your mouth. And if Russia collapses, like, I could just hear it right now. It's like, well, you're right. We shouldn't have destabilized them. We shouldn't have been funding Ukraine. We shouldn't have been, actively trying to make them fail. But now that they have failed, well, we better go arrive in Moscow, and clean things up. And we're going to need to have a permit. It's like, I guarantee you, if that's the type of arguments that will be made to justify spending the same amount, if not more money every year on this needless and honestly, very reckless war. Because it's really hard for these companies with billions of dollars on their balance sheet tied to this to let go of it. I mean, they're just not going to do it. So there's a reason why wars tend to be endless.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, folks, thanks for hanging out with us for the show tonight. We really enjoyed being with you. And if you heard us say anything that you thought might have been a bad take, or you want to encourage us by saying it was a good take, be sure to let us know on our socials. And again, like, share, subscribe, share, all that stuff. It really helps us out. And we'll catch you on the next one.